"Oh my gosh, Mark, you're still the best of them all in the whole world," Tracy exclaimed with enthusiasm. This was welcome news, albeit with a caveat. Her compliment, while well-intentioned, struck me as somewhat misguided. I immediately ceased the act of sucking in air with great intensity, reminiscent of a vacuum cleaner. A moment of reflection revealed that we have been married for 29 years. It is, therefore, understandable that she may not recall the details of her previous relationships. Nevertheless, it was somewhat surprising to hear her openly comment on these experiences during what was, by all accounts, a mutually satisfying sexual encounter. It is evident that Mark possesses a unique ability to elicit a strong emotional response from Tracy. Tracy's exclamation caused me to realize that the world had been turned upside down. I remained still, resting my head on her left thigh. After approximately 30 seconds, during which Tracy continued to breathe heavily, I wondered if she was aware of the implications of her statement. "Aren't you going to continue?" she asked, her expression indicating confusion. I replied that I was tired and that she had consumed all of my energy. She then kissed me and lay down again. Typically, after I had finished, we would cuddle for a while before going to sleep. I proceeded to the bathroom to clean up a bit, but as I was just lying in bed, Tracy dozed off. A minute later, I heard the soft sound of her rhythmic breathing. I quietly got up, went to the bathroom, and cleaned myself up a bit, then went downstairs to my wine cabinet. It is often challenging to maintain focus and awareness when one has an above-average IQ. Most guys would have been too engrossed in what they were doing to actually hear, let alone pay attention to what Tracy was saying. However, I am not like most other men. As I sat in my robe and sipped a glass of Staley's rye whiskey, I attempted to identify any potential clues that I had overlooked which might indicate a missing element in my marriage. However, nothing appeared to be unusual, except for the fact that Tracy and I were engaging in sexual intercourse more frequently than we had in recent years. I attributed this to the fact that, now that our youngest child had departed for college 6 months ago, Tracy and I were finally alone together. In the 25 years that followed, Tracy lost 20 pounds in those 6 months and began dressing in a more revealing manner to demonstrate to the world that she had regained her college weight of 120 pounds and had invested in those 120 pounds at 51. Tracy possessed the physique of a goddess, with perfect breasts and a small waist on top of great legs for a woman of average height. She has consistently been a beauty in the looks department, and for her age, she has remarkable skin, inherited from her mother, that appears to be in relatively good condition for a woman of 78. Despite the additional 20 pounds she had been carrying for several years, Tracy consistently exhibited a cheerful demeanor. When we first met as college sophomores, we dated for 2 years before marrying at 22. She has historically displayed a playful demeanor, likely due to her financial stability and physical attractiveness. However, I have never been concerned about her crossing an imaginary line until recently. It is perplexing that she believes she can engage in inappropriate behavior simply because she has a certain body type. All she has to do is smile at a man and he is hers to command. In a few years, she will have the breasts to match her smile. If she were to turn her attention to the other side, she would see the posterior that we all see. Rhonda Nichols was talking to someone in the company break room 6 months ago, unaware that the target of her vitriol was right down the hall and could hear every word of her diatribe. Tracy Robertson, the top sales agent at Midland, really had she interrupted a conversation between Rhonda and the third agent, Carl Walters, by simply walking by and smiling, despite the fact that Rhonda was already engaged in a discussion with him. Carl turned his head and followed Tracy with his eyes as she walked by, much to Rhonda's annoyance and Tracy's own amusement. This behavior has been a constant since Tracy was 14 years old, when her breasts began to grow larger than those of most of her friends. It is worth noting that Tracy is blonde and blue-eyed. Tracy observed her reflection and acknowledged that she had gained approximately 20 pounds since her college days, when she weighed 120 pounds. However, she still considered herself to have a relatively youthful appearance for her age, despite having 2 children. She was particularly self-conscious about her buttocks, which she perceived as too large for her frame. She thought of Rhonda, who was 26 years old and considered to be in good physical condition. Rhonda's interest in Carl is perplexing, given that she was previously engaged to Fred, an accountant with a notable degree of physical attractiveness. Carl, the new agent in the office at the age of 28, was several years older than his days as a starting linebacker at Ohio State. However, he maintained a commendable level of physical fitness through regular gym attendance. He was 6 feet 4 inches and 230 pounds and possessed an impressive physical presence. His attire was well-tailored and aesthetically pleasing. Tracy reflected on these observations, mentally preparing for the upcoming challenge. She opted to forego her usual lunch with the female colleagues and instead proceeded to the nearby gym, where she enrolled in a membership. She was determined to exact a significant cost from Rhonda for her misdeed. As she returned to her vehicle and departed, my thoughts were scattered. I found myself transported back in time to when Tracy and I initially encountered each other at a prominent Midwestern university. I was a mathematics specialist, and while I am not inherently malevolent, I did engage in regular physical conditioning. However, candidly, Tracy was an exceptional specimen. In the real world, goddesses do not typically engage in relationships with geeks. I was aware of her existence but had never conversed with her. It appeared that there were numerous individuals surrounding her, vying for the opportunity to become her next boyfriend. I observed her at several social gatherings and on campus, yet despite her striking appearance, I had no compelling reason to initiate contact. In the following weeks, I observed that the men who had previously shown interest in her now seemed to be overly eager to interact with her. I was attending another party when I was sitting quietly in the corner drinking beer when someone sat down next to me. I was surprised when I turned to see that it was the woman I had seen at several parties and who I had fantasized about. I was even more surprised when she asked me if I was homosexual. He inquired, "Are you homosexual or bisexual?" It is acceptable. I am not opposed to either identity, but individuals must identify as one or the other. Since I was 15, there has not been a single heterosexual male who has not attempted to engage in conversation with me. Additionally, the absence of a wedding ring indicates that you are not married. What, then, is your sexual orientation? I immediately experienced the most intense blush of my life and began stuttering in a manner that suggested profound embarrassment. Her shirt fluttered with each breath she took. She was as beautiful up close as she was across the room, and I became aroused. My genius-level IQ was unable to process what I was facing, so she said, staring at my crotch, "Neither one nor the other. I just didn't think you'd have time for someone like me with all the handsome guys lined up in front of you." She continued, "You don't put yourself out there, honey. We women do. On occasion, we women seek a certain degree of mystery in our relationships. Consequently, we left the party together and subsequently married shortly after graduating from university." I was fully aware that Trace's libido was more pronounced than mine, yet I was adept at satisfying her sexual needs. I would venture to state that I possess a certain degree of sexual prowess, a claim that would likely be endorsed by the women I have been intimate with. I was able to elicit a highly aroused state from Tracy on our inaugural sexual encounter, and I am still capable of doing so today, despite her apparent lack of interest in pursuing this activity. This evening, however, Tracy and I did not engage in sexual intercourse for a period of 2 weeks, which represents the longest interval of our lives apart from the time when she was pregnant with our children. She would either cite fatigue or a lack of desire as the reason for her reluctance, and I eventually ceased to inquire further. I approached her from behind as she was rinsing a pot in the kitchen. I cupped her breasts, which were quite large, and began to stimulate them manually. She attempted to move away from me, but I removed my hand from her chest and placed it in my sweatpants. I took the pan from her and led her to our bedroom. I undressed her in a matter of seconds, as I typically do. She screamed incoherently, as she has done on numerous occasions in the past. However, later that night, she finally began to speak, which she had not done in 29 years of marriage. She was notably loquacious, and I was not disconcerted when she vocalized her enthusiastic acquiescence. Indeed, I derived pleasure from the experience until she proceeded to evaluate my abilities, at which point the situation became considerably more intense. Trace's campaign to seduce Carl Walters commenced in earnest 2 weeks after the incident in the break room. She and Carl were engaged in negotiations that provided Tracy with an ideal pretext to extend an invitation to him for dinner. On the surface, the invitation was similar to the one she had extended to other agents. Lunch was scheduled to discuss work, as Tracy was both the senior agent in the office and the #1 producer. Typically, the higher rank paid for lunch. In this case, she ensured that Rhonda was well informed about the dinner. Tracy was professional enough to prioritize business, as a deal is a deal and a payday is a payday. Once things were settled, Tracy apparently transformed into Carl's new and perhaps most intimate friend over a bottle of wine. She learned a great deal about Carl, including details of his football career and his personal life. He informed her that he was in a relationship, although it was not exclusive. Throughout their conversation, Tracy made physical contact with Carl, touching his arm and wrist on several occasions. Her forest green professional blazer was unbuttoned, and her crisp white top was tight and unbuttoned to the top of her large breasts, which were visible to Carl during the conversation. She leaned forward several times, and after a period of time, she observed the young man's lap and realized that she had achieved her desired effect. It was straightforward to influence men, she thought to herself. He is under my control, but he is not yet aware of it. Once I have lost another 5 pounds, I will reveal my power to him. The private investigator I hired was worth a significant portion of the money I had budgeted. Despite my initial intention to embark on a vacation to Hawaii this year, the findings of the private investigator have prompted me to reconsider. It appears that Tracy was engaging in sexual relations with not one, but 2 individuals, the new realtor in her office, Carl Walters, and a man named Fred Lazarus. Additionally, her trainer at the gym was also involved. The investigator's report was notably reserved in tone. As he presented his findings, I was compelled to consider whether he would also pursue my unfaithful spouse. Despite his somewhat nerdy demeanor, I have cultivated a diverse circle of acquaintances over the years. One of my longest-standing friendships was with a lawyer named Martin Boland. Like me, Marty was a highly intelligent individual with a penchant for academics. However, I was confident that if I ever found myself in a challenging situation and required legal counsel, Marty would be a reliable ally. In the event of legal trouble, I would have been able to rely on Marty's support until the end. While he may not have been able to snap a pencil in half, I had heard stories of him having no problem crushing the spirit of an adversary to ensure his client's success. We both concurred that Tracy should be held accountable for her infidelity. We did not subscribe to a culture of guilt. Given that the state of Wyoming does not recognize irreconcilable differences as a valid reason for divorce, it is evident that Tracy's sole intention was to engage in sexual intercourse with Fred Lazarus, who was the fiancé of Rhonda. Rhonda had referred to Tracy as a cheese ass, and Tracy's rationale for engaging in the sexual act was to allow her fiancé to experience the physical intimacy of a woman with whom he was not intimately involved. It is crucial to note that this information will be kept confidential from Rhonda. However, Tracy will be able to derive satisfaction from this act for an extended period. Nevertheless, it is important to highlight that Fred Lazarus demonstrated a high degree of integrity and dignity, even in the face of such circumstances. Despite her advanced age, she was a highly skilled swordswoman. That night, she resolved to enjoy the young man's company more than she would Carl. She might even use him as an excuse to avoid Mark. She was indifferent to his feelings. Darren Trimble was not her initial intention. He was one of the trainers at the gym she joined. While she admired his muscular physique, she had no intention of sleeping with him. That changed when the young man gave Tracy a one-on-one workout. During a workout, the young man placed his strong hands on her shoulders while demonstrating the exercise. Tracy immediately felt a tingling sensation from her shoulders to her heels and, in a gentle but firm manner, pushed her ass back to rub against Darren. The young man did not hesitate to grab Tracy, and within 15 minutes, the pair were in Darren's tiny flat, grabbing each other and removing there. The urgency of a couple on the first night of their honeymoon is exemplified by the following scenario. After arriving home from Darren's apartment, which took approximately 30 minutes longer than usual, the subject was still attired in her workout clothes. Mark entered the residence approximately 5 minutes later. The subject promptly proceeded to take a shower before starting dinner. It appeared that her husband was unaware that she was still in her workout clothes. Upon my return from work, I discovered that she had recently commenced training with a personal trainer, as my detective had reported a few weeks prior. Given her regular exercise regimen and newly toned physique, I assumed that her workout had been longer than planned. She had a distressed look on her face and did not even greet me. She greeted me with a kiss and then proceeded to ascend the stairs and enter the shower. Throughout the duration of her shower, she vocalized her desire to wash the perspiration from her body. However, this rationale was undermined by the findings of my private investigator. At that moment, Tracy exhibited a sense of invulnerability and infallibility, despite my displeasure with her actions. I managed to maintain my composure during the evening when we were both present in the residence. After dinner, while she was putting away the dishes in the kitchen and I was watching television in the living room, the doorbell rang. She demanded that I come to the door, but after ascertaining through the window that it was the processing server, I politely requested that she open the door herself. She responded with a chuckle, opened the door, and, a short time later, staggered into the living room, holding a BAL manila envelope in her hands. "What on earth could have possessed you to do this to me?" she hissed, glancing at the opened envelope. "How could you have been so thoughtless as to do this to me, especially when it concerns our family? You are merely upset that I finally took the initiative and acted on your behalf." I replied with great passion, "If you had allowed yourself a little more time, you would have done this to me yourself. You have not loved me for some time, as I understand it. In fact, I believe that this has not been the case for quite some time. I am aware of others who have experienced similar circumstances." Upon completion of my statement, Tracy exhibited a pronounced blush and her demeanor shifted from shock to rage. She then demanded, "You think you know something? Then go ahead and say it. I'm all ears." I proceeded to cite the names of individuals with whom I was acquainted, including Carl Walters and Fred Lazarus. As I reached into my pocket for a small piece of paper, I observed that Darren was visibly trembling. This prompted a change in Tracy's expression, which now resembled that of an individual who had she appeared to be visibly distressed and sat down on the sofa opposite me. It seemed that she was operating under the assumption that I had merely suspicions and not concrete answers. However, I believe that if she had been more courageous, we would not be in this situation. She proceeded to verbally attack me, which I found surprising given her initial demeanor. It seemed that having sex with 3 men behind my back had significantly boosted her self-esteem. I am not to blame for my advancing age. I expressed my exasperation at the notion that 29 years of fidelity was insufficient to warrant any consideration. It is evident that these individuals were not even alive during our nuptials. Tracy's eyebrows arched in response to my assertion. In addition to being aware of her extramarital relationships, I also possessed pertinent information. Regarding these individuals, she appeared to be inclined to pursue this line of inquiry further, but then she evidently reconsidered. "I will allow you to remain in the residence until we can complete the sale. I will also permit you to provide an account to your children and your parents," I stated in a calm and measured tone. I then rose from my chair and proceeded to the closet in the hallway, where I retrieved 2 suitcases. She was not prepared for this turn of events. "I will come by in a few days to retrieve the remainder of my belongings. You are advised to hire your own legal counsel and make your own decisions. You are at liberty to contact Marty at your convenience. It is evident that your feelings towards me have changed. Therefore, we should conclude this matter without further delay. I am uncertain as to the cause of this abrupt change in circumstances." As I proceeded through the doorway, I collided with the wall. Mark's assertion that Tracy intended to divorce him was accurate. However, she was not yet prepared to take that step. She was contemplating how to manipulate the situation so that her husband would appear to be the primary aggressor. She was aware that Mark was well, the couple had a strong social network, and it was likely that they would quickly gain the support of their friends. With regard to the children, Tracy had a clear plan of action. She intended to challenge Mark's masculinity directly and hoped that the girls would understand her desire for frequent, intense sexual experiences. Tracy acknowledged that Mark's actions had caught her off guard. She wondered if anyone had not seen her husband view her with one of her lovers, and he remained unaware that she was the source of the leak. However, when she finally served him with the divorce papers, it did not appear as if Mark's world had been as devastated by it as she had anticipated. In fact, he seemed to be holding up quite well. In fact, he seemed to almost enjoy the situation. Upon departing the residence with my belongings, I experienced a sense of accomplishment. It was evident that Tracy was not prepared for the turn of events and that I had effectively managed the situation. I proceeded to the nearest motel and completed the check-in process. It was time to embark on a new phase of life. While Tracy was facing one challenge associated with the divorce, she was determined to resist and fight. She had a strong desire for me to alter the reason given for the dissolution of the marriage was irreconcilable differences rather than adultery. As a result, she retained 50% of the marital assets, indicating that the primary issue was not financial. However, I anticipated that she might attempt to portray me in a negative light in front of the children and her parents by framing this situation as a dispute over adultery. By categorizing the case as adultery, I was able to gain sufficient leverage to negotiate a more favorable outcome. It is evident that there is no compelling reason for she demanded that I divulge our personal affairs during a telephone conversation. I was instructed to alter the statement to irreconcilable differences and to sign the document without hesitation. I am aware that individuals with a penchant for intellectual pursuits may occasionally exhibit social awkwardness. However, your rationale is so transparent that it is evident. I will not provide you with an opportunity to mislead others to avoid accountability. If one were to examine the court records, it would become evident that I had engaged in extramarital relations while our marriage was still intact. Consequently, I have become the subject of public scrutiny and ridicule. I had hoped that you would demonstrate respect and initiate the divorce proceedings before you became the subject of gossip. Furthermore, I was subjected to humiliation by your spreading of rumors that I was sexually inadequate. I have learned that this information has been conveyed to a few of my acquaintances. From their wives, I believe Tracy concluded that I would rather acquiesce than risk being perceived as a weak individual. It was challenging, but what caused the greatest distress was when my youngest daughter, Allison, accused me of stalking Tracy to assuage my bruised ego. If your mother wishes to engage in such behavior, let's proceed. I surmise she has already informed you about her affair. However, I imagine you are unaware of the full extent of their actions. I will tell you that she is engaging in sexual intercourse with 3 males who are slightly older than your sister. I indicated this by holding up the appropriate number of fingers to make it easy for my daughter to count. I may not have been the man I was when I was your age, but I am still capable of taking care of myself as well as anyone. However, this is not about me. We are discussing how your mother has become a self. Ellie, 3. Does she love me anymore? Okay, but she didn't have to have sex with 3 guys who should be dating you, not your mother. Tracy, in front of Allison, staggered out of my apartment after my outburst, appearing lost and confused. I was compelled to exercise considerable restraint to refrain from escorting her out the door and offering a reassuring, fatherly embrace. 20 minutes later, I received a call from Tracy's mother, Barb, who had not spoken to me since I initiated divorce proceedings. To have a great relationship, how could you say such horrible things to my granddaughter? She screamed at me when I answered the phone. This girl used to worship the ground you walked on. Now she's lying on my couch crying her eyes out. How could you say such terrible things about Tracy? Please, Mom, listen for a second. It is evident that you have only heard one side of the story and that it does not align with the truth. There are 3 individuals with whom she has been sexually involved, and if you are still uncertain, I have tangible evidence. Barb took in a significant amount of air, which could have been used to launch a weather balloon. Mark, do you have any photographic or video evidence? I said quietly, I was not intending to resort to the extreme measure of destroying her life's work, but it would appear that your daughter considers the complete obliteration of all evidence to be a necessary course of action. However, I must inform you that this is not the case. I will speak with her. There are 3 men involved. Mark, I am truly sorry for this turn of events. I am truly sorry for what I have done. I am truly sorry. She terminated the call. I shook my head in disbelief. Barb has been a mother to me since my passing approximately 12 years ago. I could always talk to her and discuss some of my current difficulties are twofold. Firstly, there is the issue of communication. I have been unable to speak with her for some time. Secondly, I have caused her significant distress by sharing my views on her daughter's character. I have also presented physical evidence that her daughter's actions were grounds for divorce. The divorce was eventually granted on the grounds of adultery. However, it took approximately a year. During this time, Tracy continued to entertain her 3 young boys. I was not aware of this. It is evident that I was no longer monitoring her activities. Approximately 1 month after initiating divorce proceedings, 2 female colleagues from the university's science department visited my basement office in the math building to inquire about my well-being. Despite having worked at the same institution for several years, I had only a superficial familiarity with both of them. Over the course of several years, I had only a superficial acquaintance with both women. During their visit, I engaged in minimal conversation with them, probably not exceeding 10 words. It was thoughtful of them to express concern. I was somewhat perplexed by their decision to offer comfort, but I had their contact information should I have desired to discuss further. I must acknowledge that they were both commendable individuals. Given that one of the women was divorced and in her 50s and the other was widowed in her 40s, such occurrences became a regular phenomenon over the following weeks, with women from all over campus stopping by to inquire about my well-being. One day, as I was departing my office, the administrative secretary of the mathematics department walked by and offered me a warm smile. "What is going on with everyone lately?" I inquired. "Have I inherited some money that I am unaware of?" "You have," Colleen replied, her tone almost mocking. She was 35 years old. Colleen was a woman with a curvaceous figure. She had raven hair and green eyes. I had previously observed a certain sparkle in her eyes, but on this occasion, I took the time to truly observe her and was struck by her beauty. "It's because of your recent weight loss," she explained. She then raised her left hand and moved her fingers, placing special emphasis on her ring finger. "You recently lost 120 pounds. You were always considered a nice guy. He was a kind individual, yet you were regarded as an outlaw due to your marital status. It was common knowledge that you were infatuated with your wife. However, with your wedding ring missing, it could be perceived that you are currently available for marriage. There may be numerous eligible bachelors, but not all of them are suitable. You have become a rare commodity, attractive, intelligent, and solitary. It is unclear who was the first to see the divorce papers, but it spread rapidly across campus. However, the divorce has not yet been finalized. The finalization of the divorce is still pending, and I will not become a free man for a few more months. I am flattered by the attention, but I am aware that many people are eager to ascertain my availability. I am also applying to Dr. Robertson's program. I will place your application in the queue." Tracy was aware that although Mark was angry with her, he was not the type of man to discuss his personal situation. She decided that she could at least keep her personal situation a secret for a while. However, this assessment was proven wrong within 2 weeks and continued to be proven wrong until the divorce was made final about a year later. One might inquire as to the rationale behind such a decision. Marge Rochambeau, Trace's oldest and closest friend, inquired about this when she approximately 1 month after Mark applied, Marge contacted Tracy. Tracy was perplexed by this, as she had not yet informed her friends and family of the situation. Marge resided in Trace's hometown, approximately 2 hours north. Tracy incorrectly assumed that she had at least a couple of months before she would have to inform her wider social circle. However, it became apparent that someone in Trace's family had already disclosed this information. Those who know Mark would remain silent. It is a lengthy account. Marge Tracy began attempting to discern the most prudent manner in which to inform her acquaintance of the complete truth, at least for the time being. I was informed of the majority of the details by my mother after she attempted to evade me and subsequently became visibly distressed while we were at Walmart last week. Marge contacted Trace's mother, Barb, who is also my maternal figure, from the earliest days of our friendship when we were both in the 2nd grade. Marge encountered Barb at the store and inquired about Tracy. Barb initially stuttered and rambled, but eventually became emotional and began to cry. Once Marge had calmed Barb down, she was able to convey the full, unfiltered story. Barb revealed that Marge had been unfaithful to a number of significant partners, including a wonderful boyfriend, husband, father, and provider. The reason for this infidelity was that, as Barb explained, she had begun to believe that she deserved better. "Tracy, what about you?" As she approached the age of 60, Marge reflected on her own mortality and the inevitability of change. She considered the possibility that she might not be the same person she was at 30. Marge expressed her disbelief at the idea that she could be selfish, even in the context of a divorce. Mark, her former husband, was currently residing in his apartment. He ate a small salad and drank half of a 750 milliliter bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon. In contrast, Tracy invited Carl to a formal dinner, after which they returned to his residence. This was a scenario they had repeated on numerous occasions over the past year and several months. However, for reasons that remain unclear, Tracy found herself unable to maintain the pretense. She did not like what was happening, but admitting this to herself or even more so to him was absolutely impossible. When it was finally over, she informed him that she was tired and needed to go. Upon returning home, she removed Carl's hands from her chest, got dressed, and left. As she entered her vehicle, she noted that her inaugural official night as a divorced woman was far from successful. Despite her intellectual abilities, which include the ability to crack passwords in her head and read 4 books simultaneously, she remains uncertain about how to understand a woman. She informed Judy Scaly, a longtime friend of Trace's, and I, as we had dinner on my first official date, that she was unsure how to proceed. In the weeks following the official dissolution of my marriage, I selected Judy as my romantic partner. She was an established acquaintance, and I believed that our relationship would be free of misunderstandings. I had long assumed that I had a firm grasp on the characteristics and expectations of romantic relationships. However, it became evident that my assumptions were misguided, as I had been operating under a false understanding for approximately 30 years. Judy was an artist, and I found her thought processes to be distinctive. She was a few years my junior and maintained a fitness regimen that included regular stretching. Furthermore, her practice of yoga and her smooth skin belied her age. She had dark brown hair and blue eyes that seemed to possess the capacity to penetrate one's soul. I found myself contemplating her in a state of undress within my bed. I was hopeful that you would eventually contact me, Mark, she replied. However, I did not anticipate that I would be your primary consideration, so I am deeply honored. Nevertheless, I suggest that we refrain from discussing you and Tracy at this time. Perhaps we can engage in this conversation over a cup of coffee. Let us act as mature adults and allow our respective lives to proceed independently. I concur that dwelling on the past impedes progress. I rose from my seat, leaned in towards Judy, and planted a kiss on her lips. She also rose from her seat, leaned over the table towards me, and attempted to remove my tonsils from my mouth. I nearly choked when she allowed me to gasp for air before doing so. I had never considered Judy in a sexual manner. While she was undoubtedly a beautiful woman and I could appreciate her physique, I did not experience sexual desire for other women while I was married. Firstly, I was married, and secondly, why would I desire another woman when I was married to an exceptional individual? I was out of the dating scene for an extended period, and I believe this was evident. I do not believe my complexion returned to its typical color. I attempted to relax and remain calm until the conclusion of the meal. I believe I was able to engage in a coherent conversation. We consumed a slice of cheesecake and each had coffee for dessert. It seems that we should return to my house for a nightcap. Mark, Judy said, looking into my eyes, if I am not mistaken, you have not engaged in sexual intercourse since you left Tracy. I would like to be your first sexual partner after Tracy. I am aware that this may seem absurd, but I am genuinely. I was reluctant to engage in sexual intercourse with Judy. Given the length of time that had elapsed since our last encounter and my awareness that I would not be able to sustain an erection for an extended period, I was concerned about the potential consequences. As Judy was a close acquaintance of both Tracy and myself, I was acutely aware that our sexual encounter would become public knowledge. Dr. Markland Robertson, a distinguished professor of computational physics at the university, is a failure. In bed, I could comprehend why Tracy had chosen to terminate our relationship, given my lack of achievement in the most crucial areas of my life. Judy prepared coffee when we arrived at her residence and subsequently excused herself to change into more comfortable attire. My mind was in a state of confusion. Judy returned wearing what appeared to be a terry robe, crafted from a pullover with straps that only reached her thighs, were approximately mid-thigh in length, and her nipples were visible through the thin terry cloth, indicating that she had removed her bra. I was intrigued. We sat together on her couch, drinking coffee and engaging in casual conversation. I attempted to conceal my arousal. I heard Judy's voice from somewhere deep within my consciousness. I was suddenly aware of a drool running down my chin. Judy carefully took the coffee cup from my hand, placed it on the edge of the table, and quietly led me into her bedroom. I was in a state of heightened arousal and disorientation as she slowly undressed me completely. I attempted to slow down the process, but my brain was overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. I was not yet ready for it to end. Judy understood my desire for more time and replied, "We can do this again. I am capable of repeating this action. I am patient, but I have limits." I removed her robe. I would say that everything proceeded as planned. Did you truly have to be so difficult to resist, Judy? Indeed, I did. Is that not the purpose of your presence here? She then turned her back to me, allowing me to embrace her. We subsequently fell asleep, and I slept for several hours, waking up to the sensation of Judy's body from the waist down. Good morning, Sonia. Good morning to you too, I replied with enthusiasm. You are incomparable, honey, she said, looking me directly in the eyes. 1 month later, Tracy contacted Judy to extend an invitation to a meeting. Despite their individual friendship, Judy was aware that the purpose of the dinner was to discuss the time she had spent with Tracy's former partner. She had previously met Mark on a few occasions and did not consider this invitation to be entirely unexpected. The initial 10 minutes were spent discussing current events and their children. Before Tracy finally initiated the opening volley, Judy had already been on numerous dates. Judy was under the impression that Tracy had ceased her exercise regimen. Tracy responded with a cat purr, took a sip of her margarita, and waited. Judy felt herself blush as Tracy made her statement, although she was aware of what awaited her. She suddenly felt less comfortable than she had anticipated. She had assumed that the encounter would be brief. The initial motivation to satisfy her own curiosity transformed into something more personal when Mark Robertson provided her with some rather exceptional dates. This man was evidently an expert in the field of sexual intimacy. Judy reflected on this observation, questioning whether he consistently demonstrated such proficiency. She inquired, seemingly like a young woman overcome with curiosity. Tracy, however, was somewhat perplexed by Judy's evaluation of her former partner. Judy's reaction indicated that Tracy's assertion that Mark would not engage in extramarital relations with a mistress to the same extent that he did with his wife was accurate. Furthermore, Judy's response suggested that the sexual encounters with her were of a mediocre nature. This prompted Tracy to confirm that Mark had significantly impacted her life. She then inquired as to the rationale behind allowing such a man to depart from her life, prompting Judy to respond that she was not in a rational state of mind. Tracy's expression then shifted, and she took a brief sip of her margarita before raising her eyebrows in response. She then swiftly changed the subject. She set her drink down. Judy observed that her praise of Mark was not at all what Tracy had anticipated. She was disinclined to reveal her own feelings on the matter and thus allowed Tracy to steer the conversation away from Mark. Molly Hamilton was positioned against my right side, her right hand on my chest, breathing rhythmically in her sleep. We had just concluded a rather passionate sexual encounter. What we were doing was not, in fact, love-making, and I was quite tired as well. I was exhausted and felt like I had gained a great deal of vitality. If I live to be 100, I will never fully comprehend the female psyche. My wife's infidelity was a result of my inability to satisfy her sexually. Consequently, I engaged in sexual intercourse with my third female partner in the past 3 months. The experience was arguably the most satisfying sexual encounter of my life, and I was 32 years old at the time. She emitted a high-pitched scream and appeared to be on the verge of losing consciousness. I am unable to reconcile these disparate elements. Molly is a physician assistant employed at an orthopedic clinic. I recognize that this may sound implausible, but I actually encountered her at the gym. She was engaged in rigorous exercise on the machines, perspiration was evident on her face, and her form was accentuated by the tightness of her workout uniform. I typically direct a brief gaze at attractive women and then move on. However, this particular woman was amenable to displaying her physical capabilities, even exhibiting a grunt as she rose to her feet. Her tousled hair was covered in sweat, which indicated that she was there to work, not to attract a partner. That is precisely why she attracted me. I waited until she had finished her workout and headed to her locker before cautiously approaching her. Despite many women expressing interest in being asked out since my divorce, I had not dated much since my divorce. However, there was something about her appearance and her efforts at the gym that made me want to pursue a relationship with her. I introduced myself and asked if I could invite her over for coffee and dessert. One evening, she paused for a moment, and I observed a shift in the shape of the light in her green eyes before she consented. She requested my contact information and entered her name and number. We exchanged smiles, and I took note of her attractive posterior as she turned and exited the gym. Before she could exit the premises, I called her on the telephone. I recognize that this may appear somewhat desperate, but I felt it was an opportune time to inquire. "How about Thursday evening?" she asked, and she turned to face me. Through the glass of the door, she smiled widely, and I believe my heart may have skipped a beat. Therefore, I arranged to meet her on Thursday evening at LO at 7 p.m. I am pleased to report that the rest of my workout proceeded without incident. In fact, I experienced no discomfort at all on Thursday night. I arrived at Lou's at 6:50, located a small table in the back, and ordered cheesecakes less than 2 minutes later. Molly arrived shortly thereafter. She had long blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail, was wearing tight jean shorts, and was wearing a t-shirt. She was wearing a shirt that did not extend to the top of her shorts. She was displaying the results of her abdominal exercises at the gym, and I could not fault her for doing so. They were undoubtedly impressive. Her breasts appeared somewhat diminutive, but they seemed to be in good proportion with the rest of her body. Furthermore, she would likely have attracted excessive attention if they were larger, as she was not wearing a bra, and it was evident when she approached me. I was seated. At a high-top desk, Molly was compelled to sit upright in her chair, which I held for her. As she sat down, her braless breasts exhibited a slight movement. She then caught me looking at the rebound and raised an eyebrow in question. I responded with a smile and a nod, indicating that I was aware of her observation. We proceeded to engage in a 2-hour conversation while consuming cheesecake and coffee. I found myself increasingly drawn to this woman, who was not much older than my daughters. However, I am uncertain as to her level of interest in me. She did, however, agree to go out with me. On the following Saturday, we proceeded to the Antique Car Museum, after which we proceeded to a restaurant for a light repast. We then returned to my apartment, and the remainder of the evening's events are now history. It is evident that the older gentleman still had some vigor remaining, while Mark was dozing off on the other side of town. Tracy was engaged in a rather intense sexual encounter with a young man she had met earlier in the evening. She again did not dress herself up as she would have liked, but this did not seem to be a significant issue. She reflected that the evening had been more enjoyable than she had anticipated. As she entered the vehicle to return home, she briefly observed her reflection in the rearview mirror. Despite the positive impression she had gained, she was conscious of a certain discrepancy. Carl had terminated their relationship a month previously, citing his desire to pursue a relationship with someone who was seeking marriage and children. These were aspirations that Tracy was unable to fulfill. She acknowledged that Carl had handled the dissolution of their relationship with civility, but she was nevertheless experiencing a sense of loss. Tracy had been dumped for the second time in a row. The first was Mark, and the second was Carl. She was able to rationalize Carl's departure by noting that the sex with him was becoming stale. She also observed that he seemed disinterested. She reflected that she was an individual with certain expectations and standards, and that this situation was not in alignment with her values. She considered that perhaps she should look for someone more her age, as they might not be as attractive as the younger men she had been with previously. The younger guys, but perhaps she would genuinely be interested in what they had to say. Molly only served to reinforce my long-held beliefs about Tracy, based on my limited experience before meeting her. I had always felt that she was not as adept at sexual intercourse as other partners I had been with, and I was convinced that this was because she was a highly attractive woman and was aware of her own appeal. Women like Tracy do not have to exert much effort to attract men, and at the same it is likely that this is the reason why they did not exert themselves greatly in the bedroom at the outset. Men derive pleasure from the fact that they have managed to attract a woman with large breasts, but this is not a long-lasting source of gratification, particularly if the woman is selfish and does not fully engage in the act. Tracy and I have held a few discussions on this topic over the years, but I have never been able to tell her that she is not particularly adept at sexual intercourse. Consequently, I have not done so. Despite my love for Tracy, I had become aware of a discrepancy between her sexual abilities and those of other women I had been intimate with. Judy, Katie, and Molly had demonstrated a level of sexual proficiency that I had not previously experienced with Tracy. As I entered into a state of repose in bed, I was overcome with the notion that Tracy had deceived me once again. 2 weeks later, I retrieved the telephone to hear Tracy's voice on the other end of the line. I was taken aback and harbored a certain degree of skepticism. I had refrained from communication with her for an extended period. When I was in the company of my daughters, they did not discuss her, as they were aware that I would not divulge any information about her to them. Nevertheless, I desired for my daughter to I informed them in explicit terms that my relationship with their mother was terminated and that they were to respect that decision. Thus far, they have demonstrated compliance. Mark April has inquired as to whether we can maintain civility long enough to survive her wedding. It appears that Robert has finally proposed marriage to her and she desires for us to wed, provided that we do not act in a hostile manner. I have not yet heard from April, but you are to assure her that I will conduct myself as a paragon of decorum. I was particularly affected by this recollection, as I was reminded that I was once in love with this woman. I will convey this sentiment to our daughter when she officially contacts me with her good news. The following day, April called to inform me of her good news. I conveyed to her the same message I had previously shared with her mother. She informed me that Tracy was assisting her with event planning. I encouraged her to enjoy the experience fully and expressed my willingness to provide financial support. While I do not typically experience intense emotions, I must admit that when I walked April down the aisle, I was overwhelmed with a sense of joy and pride. I was astonished to observe my daughter set aside her frivolous pursuits and materialistic interests, instead developing into a graceful and refined young woman. The brief procession down the aisle, which lasted only a few minutes, was nevertheless filled with a multitude of vivid images. When I entrusted Robert with the ceremony, a profound sense of joy overwhelmed me, and tears of happiness streamed down my face. I proceeded to join our family, where I stood alongside Tracy, who embraced me with a passionate kiss on the cheek. We then proceeded to dance a waltz for our father. My daughter and I observed that the dance proceeded without incident. Robert and his mother Isabel then performed a dance with a mother-son theme to the foxtrot. Subsequently, the music transitioned to a more contemporary style, and the majority of attendees were individuals in their 20s and 30s. I lingered at the bar for approximately 10 minutes, consuming a single malt scotch, before initiating contact. At that moment, Tracy was engaged in a slow dance with one of the approximately 30 male attendees. I approached and inquired if he would object to my joining them. I interjected, and he appeared somewhat embarrassed, but Tracy's demeanor brightened considerably, extending her hand in my direction. It seemed as though she was making a decision on my behalf regarding the young man in question. She teased, "You don't trust me with these kids." The young man in question, who had just been sent away, pressed his genitals against my abdomen and expressed hope that he would be able to leave with the mother of the bride. "If you desire, I will promptly bring him here." However, I surmised that you would at least temporarily enjoy conversing and dancing with an individual who does not regard Beyoncé as a living legend. I concede your point. Unless you brandish a knife and slay me on the dance floor, I believe we have conducted ourselves admirably this weekend. Do you concur? I inquired, with sincerity. I should have acquiesced, but for a fleeting moment, I feared the bride would experience a panic attack when you approached me on the dance floor. Tracy giggled. "Well, we haven't been very mature towards each other lately." I admitted this, but still, at least we waited until they left the house before we exploded. She replied. We danced through a couple of slow songs, then, as the music sped up, her previous dance partner returned and politely asked if he could switch roles with me and intervene. I think Tracy was a little surprised when I agreed. Ellie joined me at the table after I returned from the bar. Upon my return from the bar, I found my daughter seated at our table, her attention fixed on her mother's dance performance. In a joking manner, she inquired, "Do you think I'll have to worry about men stalking her when she's in a nursing home?" I briefly regarded my daughter, attempting to conceal my reaction. Her tone may have been joking, but her eyes betrayed a deeper concern. My daughter then turned to her mother and asked, "Mom, do you date?" From time to time, but replacing her is proving to be an impossible task. I am fine, or perhaps better than fine. In response, I told her that her mother does not know as much about my life as she thinks she does. However, I will say that I have no shortage of female attention and that I am not trying to replace her. I will deal with this if I want to. At that moment, Wendy Adams, an old family friend, came to our table. Wendy and her husband, Earl, have been friends with Tracy, and subsequently, Earl succumbed to cancer a few years ago, and I am aware that Wendy and Tracy maintained contact. I did not interact with her frequently, as Earl and I were close friends. Wendy was a couple of years my junior, but based on the fit of her dress, I would say that she maintained a commendable level of physical fitness. I invited her to join Allison and me at the table, but she merely smiled and requested Allison's excusal while we proceeded to the dance floor. Allison initially appeared somewhat surprised but then kindly instructed us to proceed to the dance floor and engage in a dance. Allison grasped my hand and leaned in to whisper, "Coincidences like this only occur in movies." We proceeded to dance for a few songs before heading to the bar and taking a seat in the comfortable chairs just outside the room. We engaged in conversation for a while, and then Wendy took my hand and looked quite serious in my eyes, asking the $64,000 question. "The question remains whether you still hold feelings for her, Mark. If that is indeed the case, I see no need for me to engage in a futile exercise and extend an invitation for you to join me for dinner." I must admit that I did not anticipate this turn of events. I had assumed that Wendy and Tracy were closely connected, and thus, I did not consider asking her out. Despite her undeniable charm, I had always regarded Earl as the fortunate one to have her. I must admit that I was taken aback by the apparent ease with which she was acquired, particularly given the conventional wisdom that such matters are often more challenging to navigate. Despite her actions, I will always hold a degree of affection for her, perhaps akin to the attachment one might have to a habit like smoking. I replied, "I am not in love with her, but I do have feelings for her." I did not want to create any problems between us, so I forgot that one of Wendy's best qualities was her approach to life. She quickly reminded me, "Mark, I am not a girl anymore, and I have been alone for 8 years. Given that there are few men I am interested in, I am not going to decline the opportunity to date someone who is in my presence. Tracy, you have been divorced for approximately 3 years, and I am aware that you are currently dating. You are, in a sense, the first choice in a fantasy league. Husbands, if only we had one, so I am not going to lose a second of sleep worrying about what Tracy will think about you and me dating and other things." She blushed when she said the last part, and I was suddenly seized with the desire to be the one with whom she got back on the horse, so to speak. I handed her my cell phone, and she entered her number. As I was getting my phone back, April and Robert came out of the hall looking for me. April knew who Wendy was, and the two of them chatted for a bit before Wendy said I needed to go back and play father of the bride. As I approached her, I took both her hands in mine and leaned down to kiss her on the lips. I then informed Wendy, in a quiet voice, that we would continue the narrative at a later point. Throughout the remainder of the evening, Tracy was notably attentive to me. It is possible that April had informed Tracy about my conversation with Wendy, which may have caused her to experience feelings of jealousy. I must admit that I felt a degree of flattery, even though it occurred 3 years after the initial event. When April and Robert returned to the hall, she informed Tracy that I was abruptly interrupted by Mark and Wendy Adams, who appeared to be engaged in an intimate conversation. After they separated, Allison informed Tracy that she had been observing Wendy and Mark on the dance floor and that Wendy seemed to be experiencing the excitement of first love. Allison commented that she found this situation endearing, based on the expression on Tracy's face. However, after ensuring that all necessary arrangements had been made at the end of the night, Tracy and I were left alone in the hotel lobby. I was aware that she had arrived by taxi, so I offered to provide her with a ride home. She accepted. I agreed to this condition, namely that I would allow her to purchase a beverage for me at the hotel bar. This was the most agreeable interaction between Tracy and I in recent years, so I acquiesced. We proceeded to walk down the hallway and take seats at a low table in the bar area. The waitress was asked to bring me a glass of bourbon on the rocks, while Tracy requested a different beverage. Staley, I informed the waitress when she inquired about our order that it was pleasing to see that she still remembered Mark Track. He had previously stated that I was the only woman he had ever encountered who was adept at consuming whiskey in a manner that was deemed appropriate. In response, I inquired as to whether she would have an enjoyable time with Wendy Adams. She then abruptly placed a hand to her cheek and blushed. Her cheek flushed with embarrassment as she realized the implications of her words. "I regret that I did not intend for it to come out this way," she said, stammering. "I meant to inquire whether you have considered dating her, given the number of attractive women you have dated over the past few years. I do not believe you have missed me. Was it your intention to cause me to fail so that you could sow discord between me and my partner? You poured wild oats into my glass and stared into my eyes, which seemed to glow. The silence between us lasted approximately 15 seconds as I formulated my answer. That is a rather ingenious strategy, Tracy, but it is worth noting that the individual in question engaged in sexual intercourse with another partner while we were still married. Despite this, there's been no explanation provided as to why I was treated with such disrespect. I would have been content to grow old with this person. Will this proposal still be discussed? She intervened to say that I was stunned, which would be an understatement. My jaw dropped as I stared at her. I acknowledged that I made a mistake. It was a terrible mistake. It was an incredibly stupid mistake. Tracy sighed. I was afraid that I was getting old. I got carried away with great sex with a young guy. I did this to prove to myself that I could still excite men like before. In reality, the experience was not distinct from the actual physical act. It was the excitement of a new partner, a younger man with a strong sexual desire for me. However, I lacked the insight to fully comprehend this at the time. When I began to compare these experiences with yours, I found that you were not as engaging as the younger individuals I was involved with. Your seemingly innocent demeanor initially led me to perceive you as a mere smartass. However, subsequent events revealed this assumption to be erroneous. Following your departure, the excitement associated with the game dissipated, as did the initial thrill of a new relationship. Nevertheless, the ego boost persisted. A younger man, approximately half my age, expressed interest in me, yet there was no emotional connection. Mark, I would gladly accept a hug after a satisfying sexual encounter. Have you considered dating someone your age, someone who is at your level and possesses a similar worldview, even if he lacks the vocal abilities of these younger individuals? Despite one's physical appearance, one is not 22 years of age anymore. I stated that I was attempting to rectify the situation. Mark, she said definitively, we had 30 years together. Can you forgive my misjudgment and become mine again? Please. There were large tears in Trace's eyes before all this started. I would have comforted her. I held her in my arms and attempted to improve the world for her, even after everything that had transpired. Part of me still desired to do so. Ultimately, this was a triumph of sorts. 3 years prior, this would have been a victory. However, at this juncture, it was merely an anguished plea. I shook my head slowly. Firstly, the couple had enjoyed approximately 29 years together. It would be inaccurate to describe the previous year as a positive one, but this is the reality of life. Tracy, in the context of real life, it is unlikely that success will be achieved. It would be prudent to conclude this discussion and take you home. Wendy Adams brought this particular season of The Bachelor to a close. I allowed a week to elapse before. Subsequently, we proceeded to a nearby seafood restaurant for the wedding reception. The woman in question wore a tight dress and men continued to stare at her throughout the night. However, unlike Tracy, she did not appear to be aware of the attention she was receiving. Instead, her attention was solely focused on me. Following a pleasant meal and engaging conversation, we returned to her residence. Subsequently, we proceeded to her residence for post-dinner libations and dessert. She procured us both a glass of cognac, which we imbibed in approximately 5 minutes. Thereafter, it was time for dessert. She rose from her seat, grasped my hand, and led me to the upstairs bedroom. I observed that this was not the master bedroom and did not appear to be utilized frequently. I frequently comprehended her hesitancy to engage in sexual intercourse in the bed she shared with Earl. Wendy did not require me to be cautious with her. I was aware that she had likely not engaged in sexual intercourse with more than a couple of individuals since Earl's demise. I was cognizant of the fact that they were profoundly in love with each other. The foreplay commenced with gentle kisses on her lips as I assisted her in removing her garments. She then proceeded to assist me in removing my own attire as I initiated contact with her bare shoulders and subsequently her upper breasts. Her breasts, which were still fully erect, stood out prominently against the force of gravity. The subsequent stages of the encounter were characterized by a notable degree of tenderness. Passion then emerged, which I had not anticipated in this woman. When I finally looked up, she was struggling to breathe. We kissed briefly, then lay entwined until I heard her breathing enter the sleep cycle. She appeared angelic, and I observed her sleeping for approximately 10 minutes. In the 3 years since my divorce, I have experienced a remarkable sexual renaissance and enjoyed relationships with women of all ages. However, there was something about this connection. I was satisfied on a sexual level, but it seemed that I had formed a spiritual attachment to Wendy. I found myself contemplating whether she felt the same way as I drifted into what turned out to be my best night of sleep in a long time. Although it was no longer unusual for me to wake up in a strange bed in the morning, everything about this morning felt different. It was as though I were waking up on a lazy Sunday morning. In the past, when Tracy was present, the household was abuzz with activity. The girls were engaged in some form of play, and the aroma of breakfast wafted through the house. However, on this particular morning, there was no sign of Tracy or her children. Instead, Wendy was frying bacon, and there was a pot of coffee already brewed. I put on a t-shirt and trousers. I was unable to locate my shirt and proceeded downstairs in a somewhat inebriated state, exhibiting a lack of concern for my surroundings. I subsequently discovered my shirt, which was being worn by Wendy, was missing. It was clear that she had been in a state of undress, with her sleeves rolled up to her elbows and the buttons only halfway fastened. The shirt, however, appeared to be in pristine condition. I expressed my gratitude to Sonia for allowing me to borrow it. She stated that my shirt smelled like me and expressed a desire to linger in its proximity for a while longer. I inquired as to whether she would be amenable to breakfast. In response, she suggested that a starving man might be able to obtain a modicum of attention. As I extended my arms and embraced her, she approached me in a slow, deliberate manner. Her scent was reminiscent of the night before, and I found it difficult to imagine anything more alluring. A superior aroma, I observed. She concurred, emitting a similar sentiment. We proceeded to consume sustenance and deliberate on our prospective endeavors for the day. Given that it was Saturday, we had the luxury of time to pursue our individual agendas. Our discussions did not encompass my own plans or hers. Instead, we focused on our collective intentions. We formulated several itineraries before I arrived. With the most brilliant idea of my life, this may sound absurd, but how about we get married today? I inquired. She responded, I will do whatever you think is best. It was that simple. I knew the local justice of the peace had Saturday office hours, so I called to inquire about his availability at 4 p.m. Accordingly, we had just over 7 hours to prepare for the wedding ceremony. I required a best man, and Wendy's 28-year-old son, Aaron, was willing to assist. I informed him that the bride was his mother. He stated that he, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter would drive for an hour to attend the ceremony. Wendy contacted her mother and requested that she serve as her maid of honor. When she asked her cell phone to be on speaker, I heard her mother's voice. The law firm's managing partner, whom I had never met, became visibly emotional and was unable to respond verbally. I then contacted my 2 daughters and extended invitations to April, Robert, Allison, and any other individual she wished to include as her +1. One of my daughters inquired whether I should also invite my mother as my guest. I replied that while I would not exclude her, I would prefer not to extend an invitation. I explained that my mother has experienced a challenging period recently and that I do not want to appear to be capitalizing on her situation. I promptly contacted one of my closest acquaintances, the proprietor of a reputable restaurant in our locality. I inquired about the availability of his banquet hall for the designated period. He expressed his willingness to provide the venue, which I subsequently reserved for the specified day. We proceeded to extend invitations to a few other individuals whom we deemed would be delighted to join us in celebrating this momentous occasion. Before proceeding, I visited a renowned jewelry establishment to procure an engagement ring. Tracy was departing her preferred boutique with several bags. In her hands, she almost literally ran into Wendy on the sidewalk. Despite the fact that they were not as close as they once were, they were still friends and had been for approximately 25 years. They chatted amiably on the sidewalk for a few minutes before Tracy noticed 2 rings on Wendy's left hand. My God, girl, she said, they are absolutely amazing. Wendy blushed deeply as a light went on in Tracy's brain. Are you married to Mark? She asked. Wendy was visibly distraught, and Tracy immediately took her friend by the shoulder to help calm her down. Tracy apologized for the unexpected turn of events, admitting that she had not discussed the matter with Wendy in great detail. She explained that the situation had unfolded rather rapidly, and Wendy blushed. Tracy then inquired whether Wendy had ever experienced a sense of absolute certainty about a decision, to which Wendy replied that she had. She went on to say that she could not imagine letting such an opportunity slip away. Wendy promptly raised her hand to her lips, indicating that she wished to modify her previous statement. "That is not what I meant," she clarified. "I understand," Wendy replied. "It is simple. I acknowledge your perspective. I trust you. I am willing to learn from my mistakes and to avoid repeating this mistake in the future. I will not allow this man to escape." "There must be many other suitable candidates," Tracy countered. "There are," Wendy agreed. "I am aware of that. However, I made a decision to leave Mark, and I am now facing the consequences of that decision." "You are a smart woman," Dr. Ellen McFarlane, Tracy's therapist, observed. "You have made an informed decision. I am confident that you will find a suitable partner in the future." Robertson, it would have been prudent to recognize that there are a limited number of suitable single men at your age. However, you did not even explore that possibility. Did you genuinely believe that you could attract a talented young man and maintain a relationship with him? It would have been more realistic to anticipate that at some point you might have to engage in conversation and consider a long-term commitment with him instead of merely engaging in sexual intercourse. In reality, situations like this can be challenging. I am currently standing on the back porch of the house that Wendy and I purchased together shortly after we got married. We purchased our home together shortly after our marriage 10 years ago for a number of reasons. We felt it was important to have our own residence. Our home is a smaller house with only 2 bedrooms, but it has a large living room and a large family room, which allows us to accommodate our extended family when we have all 3 children and their respective families. We have already become grandparents 6 times. I am grilling when Wendy emerges from the house with a couple of whiskeys on the rocks. She hands me one and pecks me on the cheek. Her appearance is striking. Despite her 63 years of age, she exudes a youthful vitality. Her light brown hair displays a hint of grey, yet her striking features command attention. She is a frequent participant in our informal social gatherings. Despite our advancing age, we retain a youthful vigor. We engage in sexual activity twice a week, including in the shower. Medical science has bestowed upon us the capacity to enjoy a vibrant and active sex life. From the depths of my heart, I cannot fathom a future without Wendy. She has captured my heart in a way that Tracy never did. In a twisted way, I should be grateful that Tracy cheated on me because without that pain, I would never have had this pleasure. I encounter Tracy every few months. She has not looked well for a long time. She always looks sad and constantly apologizes. I always think about it, but I am too polite to ever say the word thank you out loud. At 65, Tracy's large breasts no longer, however, with the use of an appropriate support bra, this was less noticeable. She regained her curvaceous figure, and as she walked through the mall, she became aware that men were no longer paying her any attention. As she headed to her car in the parking lot, she noticed Mark walking towards her. She made sure to stand straight as he approached. "Hello, beautiful," he said affably, leaning down to kiss her on the cheek. Tracy was unable to suppress a blush at the compliment. The couple then engaged in small talk for a few minutes, mostly about their shared experiences. Before long, Mark suggested that it was time for him to depart. He was aware that the inevitable would occur shortly thereafter. "Mark, I'm truly sorry," Tracy said, her voice laden with regret. Mark met her gaze, paused, and smiled, though he did not utter a word. He then entered the vehicle and proceeded forward, moving on with his life. To avoid being deceived by your partner's infidelity, subscribe to our channel. The following story is more impactful than the previous one. If you are under the age of 18, abstain from listening to the subsequent narrative.